All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So I always start these by talking a little bit about my and so back in the day when I applied to college, which was 2002, the Common App was kind of in its first year of existence, I think, at that point. So I wrote and I wrote also about how I wanted to be a roller coaster designer. I only applied to 4 schools. I know that seems insane to everybody that you would only apply to 4 schools, but I only applied to 4 schools. Part of which the reason was because I had to write a separate application for every school that I applied to. I did not. As I said, it was like it's existence. So I applied to MIT, I applied to Stanford, I applied to University of Illinois, and I applied to Princeton. Guess where I got in? Well, rather, I wrote about Running Man for Stanford in Illinois, and I wrote about wanting to be a roller coaster designer for MIT. Guess where I got in? And since I can't see all of you, normally I would see you, and I would see some laughs. It would be shout some answers if you want. But guess where I got in? Well, I didn't get into Stanford and Princeton. Turns out that writing an essay about marching bands is generally not a great idea. And we'll more detail on that later. But I wrote about roller coaster design and wanted to be a roller coaster designer. And clearly I am now, a world-class roller coaster designer. No, I actually run a writing company. So obviously, kind of what you end up doing in life a lot of times is very different than what you were probably going to be writing about for, what you may for like what your future application, and that's okay, right? It's okay that it takes a long time. You're, 17, 18 years old. You're not going to really have a great sense of what you might do in the future. So, that's going to be great. Somebody's going to say something here? Here's some echoing.
I think it might be somebody. If you don't need your audio, turn it off.
Okay, do I still have echo?
Yeah.
What happened to your iPhone?
Okay, so
Debbie, can you cover the instructions of just like where the mute button is?
Yes. Chris, Katie, Marie, Tristan, if you can shut off your audio, it's in the bottom left corner on the gray bar.
Yeah.
Okay, Brett.
Click the microphone button.
Yes.
Great. So some ground rules, right? So don't freak out. Your essays are going to be great. You're all starting early.
This phone has no app. I have not downloaded it.
Okay. Chris, can you shut your audio off?
Look at Daddy's phone. It's on
Okay.
audio.
And Chris, Aiden, it's on the bottom left-hand corner.
This is no charge.
And Hassan.
Debbie, can you mute individual people?
No.
I think if you click the people icon, you might be able to mute people because it'll show everybody's name, and you might be able to mute them.
No, I know. I do have a list of all the participants, and it shows me if their video and audio is on, but then it won't let me actually change it.
You can't click their audio button?
We can't change it. No.
Did you have video?
Other option is that if you are the one that's making the echo, just put in some microphones into your computer.
That's okay. So the only so Felicity, if you can also shut your audio off. And Karima,
Yeah, Karima can't just turn her audio off.
And then there's somebody who's dialing in by phone, 713-540-1111. If you can shut your audio off.
540-1111, your audio.
And Chris. And then if all those people shut it off, we should be okay.
So let's try this.
Okay, I think that might have done it.
Yep.
Yay. Okay. The open Fowler ask some questions, talk about what we're going to have discussion points where we can talk about what we're going to be writing about in our essays, and also just be open to feedback. Opportunity for significant improvements. No matter how good you think it might be, there's always a way to make it better. And any author would tell you that, right? It's not like Charles Dickens wrote, sat down A Tale of Two Cities in one sitting and just rocked it, right? He was constantly tweaking things, doing different stuff associated with it. And so kind of think of your essay a little bit, especially your first draft. Usually we'll talk about the drafting and review process as we go, and kind of how your parents can help you, or friends can help you, or other people can help you with it. So our agenda today, we're going to talk about the test. I know some of you here have already written your drafts of your essays, so this is going to kind of put them to the test. If you have not written your draft for the essay, it's going to help you kind of decide on the content you might want to write about. We're going to create an essay, and we'll talk about the common types of outlines for essays. We're actually going to talk about, have 4 essays that were submitted, and so we're actually going to go through those essays and just talk about some feedback associated with different essays. We're going to wrap up with some tips on common supplements. The goal of this session is to walk away with a plan for your personal statement. So let's get started. By show of hands, which I cannot see, so I'm going to stop my screen share for 1 second so I can actually see how many people's hands will come up. Who here has written a draft of their essay? Parents, have you written the draft of your essay? I hope you didn't write it for your kids. It's fun. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do now is, if you've written a draft of your essay, that's great. If you haven't, that's also fine. Most likely, if you've written a draft of your essay, you're going to be making some significant modifications to your essay based off of this session, so it's totally fine. Yeah. Now, parents, I want you to do this as well. So imagine that you are now 17 or 18 years old. What did you do in high school? What were your experiences, future ambitions, all these things that we're going to cover? You're going to do this as well from your own perspective, not from the student's perspective. This will enable you to have a fun conversation, all the students out there, to have a fun about what they would have written about in their essays. As I always tell people, parents, you want your kids to write your essays, write their essays, draft your own essay, and then have a little fun night of it. Have a movie night plus reading each other's essays, and you can comment on them and tell you how bad they were and all that sort of fun stuff. All right. So now that we've done that, we're going to go through basically the 4 critical things that you should include in your personal statement. We are going to pause as we go, so you can each as we go, and at the end of this, you'll have a pretty good idea about the types of things you should write about for your personal statement. Awesome. And then we'll have a little bit of a discussion. So I'm going to share my screen again, and I see a lot of people that I've seen some people give slight glimmers of smiles as we just talked about that. So, give some big smiles as we go. That, what you want to come across is I've changed as a person. This is who I am now. This is all this that I've done. This that is awesome. Okay. So you don't want to just say I've changed and then end your essay. You want to say what are the actions that you've now taken since this period of personal a better person. So it's not something you have to stay away from. My general philosophy is you can write about any topic for a time of personal growth, or just any topic in you can make language is that like what I call a setting versus like the actual theme of the essay. So there's a lot of other topics that are generally topics that are like marching band. Another is drama. Another is like, or some sort of theater, orchestra, band, music. Things tend to be not as compelling as essays because what a school is looking for is somebody that's going to come in, that's self-motivated, a self-learner, intellectually curious, and is going to be successful, that dives into a given topic and is just really excited about it. However, all of those things that I just talked about, you can still have a really compelling essay if, for example, your setting of your essay, but your essay is really about becoming a leader, for example, right? Or the setting may be athletics, but it's really about how you've like figured out a way to like study your game footage, right? And like break down like how do you shoot a basketball, and like you've actually gone through this really cool learning, process of self-learning, right? Related to that can be a really compelling essay. But it's more around like how did you learn to improve your skills and the setting is basketball versus like it's an essay about basketball. You see what I'm saying? Like, so you kind of have to think of like what is the setting, but like what is the main message that you're actually trying to get across in your essay?
Okay. Two more. How deeply can we venture in the idea of growth? Should it be specific or about constant change?
So I would try to be specific because specificity with your personal experiences kind of lends itself to like better understanding the person versus being vague. So a lot of the better essays that you'll see like tend to be fairly specific about like what happened in these experiences, and some of the other essays are like, oh, I'm an amazing, right? That's not particularly exciting, but they're trying to cover like more ground. So a lot of times, you really kind of want to like hone in on a particular that you want to talk a little bit about some of the additional changes or experiences that you've had, since then. But you really kind of want to, and part of it's like I would need to see the essay or the story better in order to see whether or not it's like something that makes sense to kind of do as like a longer period of time and like focusing on a lot of little areas of growth, or which we or just focusing it on one area.
Okay, two more actually.
What's
very
the last
good
one that we spoke about? Okay.
Well, one is about does the growth have to be from sophomore to junior year? And this other question, I'm just going to give you both. You can probably go into it. Is probably comes up a lot. Is the being a camp counselor? Is that a topic to talk about?
What was that?
Being a camp counselor.
Okay. So first, your time of personal growth can really be any time. I tend to push people. It doesn't have to be sophomore, junior year. It could be freshman year. Sometimes a time of personal growth isn't just like a day or a week or a month. Like it could be over spanning, months, years. It doesn't have to be very over a longer period of time. It could start in middle school and go later. I tend to, recommend shying away from right. Sometimes I'll see good content related to that where it's like one, like just like a sentence here or there that just kind of like starts kind of building up like a sense of who the student was as a person before their time to personal growth, which you do want to cover, but you kind of want to stay away from a lot of these types of things that were much, much earlier in life, unless it was like, a start of something that then kind of goes on later. We can all build on each other. The second thing is camp counselor. Once again, it's like the setting versus like the theme of what you learned. I was writing a camp counselor or a mission trip, for example. That would be a very small piece of my essay, but I would say that's kind of like the catalyst. Might have like 3, 4, 5 sentences on it, right? That's the catalyst to talking about how that changed you and then like how you've grown since then. So what other actions have you now taken as a result of this initial experience? So you make a counselor, and that now ties to the fact that you want to be an educator, or that you were a camp counselor that worked with special needs kids and now you want to work with special needs kids in the future. Like there's a clear tie-in between initial experience and your ambitions for the future. The key is like you need to demonstrate continued engagement, and actions that you've taken along the path as the counselor to to show that yes, what I learned about myself has actually changed who I am as a person. Like that's a really critical piece of this. Like you don't want to spend all 600 experience like while you were the camp counselor. Like that maybe could be a third of your essay, like 200 words worth of your essay. Okay.
Okay. We have a few more, but do you want to go through a few more? Or you want to?
Yeah, I think in like the purpose of time, like what I'll do is I'll stay on after this session and we can just like do a bunch of fun questions. But like I want to move on. So like, so the second thing that you find make for really great personal statement essays, and some of this ties to your time of personal growth in some cases, are what are you really passionate about? Okay, I'm not passionate about anything. Like, yes, you're a student. Like, I understand that. Like, you're 16, 17, 18 years old. Like, everybody thinks that they're not passionate about anything. But the fact that you probably don't know it yet. So a couple questions that you can ask yourself related to this is, what is something that you actually find yourself spending most of your free time doing or learning about? What? Maybe you just have found yourself like really engaged with like content related to politics recently. Cool. Like you can write about that as like a person, right? Another way to look at this is like, what do you do that is far and beyond what your peers do? Right. So if you're a member of some organization, like what is your contribution to that organization compared to what peers in that organization are? Like what are you bringing to the table? Like if you weren't there, like is there a bunch of stuff that wouldn't have happened? Right? Did you consider a lot of this stuff? Like think about those types of things, and that can start leading to like, oh, I'm actually like really passionate about this. Like I spend a lot of time on it. Right, that can make for really compelling content for your essay. At the time of personal growth, you can actually just write an essay about like, hey, I'm really, really, really passionate about, I don't know, like sneaker design, right? And you've like made your thing, and you can like talk through like a bunch of all of these different things, and that can make for really compelling content as well. Just kind of think about like, where are you spending like most of your free time? Like what are you doing? Others are doing. Like if you ask your peers, like, what am I really good at? Like what am I known for? Your peers can probably tell you, and that may be something that's like, oh, maybe I should be writing about that. It's like a passion. I just want to take a minute there. If you have like, oh, I'm thinking about this as like a passion of mine, you can drop that in. Ideally, once again, passions that relate to your future ambitions are really good to write about. Passions also relate to like your time of personal growth, right? Are really good to kind of have in mind as you're writing about your time of personal growth.
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Sorry, the chat keeps kicking me out whenever I try and type something in it, so I'm just gonna say my question out here.
Go for it.
Okay, I want to say you have a location that you want to talk about. Like, would that be a good topic of an essay, like for college essays, to like write about a location that has helped you see the world a little bit differently?
Yeah, so you just have to be careful with that a little bit, because a lot of times I'll see an essay that will be about like, oh, I took this trip to this like foreign country and changed my mind on like cultural stuff. Okay. Once again, like that could be like an inciting incident to a much broader experience or growth that you've had. But like whatever you learned basically or grew from that location, that you need to be able to talk about like specific actions that you've now gone on to take and like how that to like prove to me that this is like an experience that changed you. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes, that does. Thank you so much.
Yep, no problem.
Brad, there was a question about how do you tie in, for example, passion for gaming when you're interested in computer science?
Good question. Gaming, that's a difficult thing to write about. Now, always our essays with that, especially as like esports are becoming, more and more accepted. Keep in mind that so let me just talk about gaming, and then I'll talk about gaming and computer science. Okay. So if you're going to write about gaming, think about like, okay, maybe you're really got into Fortnite or something. All I know is the name of that. I don't even know what it is, but Fortnite. So all I'm with the people, right? And maybe like you've done kind of something related to that to like figure out how to like build your skills there, or like, you actually take on some sort of leadership role, like with like a group of other people that are all playing. Becoming like the setting of your essay is Fortnite, but your essay is really about something else and how you've grown, right? Your skill set, and kind of like how you problem solve and all that sort of stuff. And it's had positive impacts on others' life. Great. So you kind of write that. Gaming and computer science. Now, gaming and computer science are very, very different. And so if you are trying to tie games to science, a lot of people try to do, what I would generally say is like you should be like the inciting incident for your interest in technology might be gaming and starting with that, but maybe you've actually started to like learn to code, right? Actually have like coded some things or done some things kind of related to that. There's just like so many people that are interested in computer science now have already, before they've even gotten to school, like done, had some sort of experience learning coding and all that sort of stuff, just because there's so much out there freely available online to do that. So once again, it's like that tie-in is not direct. You need to have like something in between. All right, next. There's a lot of words on this page. Tim Sawyer, the college essay guy, is a very good friend of mine, and one of the exercises that he's always telling people to do, that we've always also liked for people to do, is like to list 3 words that describe you. So this is like your personal values, like so what do you value as a person, and the basically. So here's a bunch of examples of that up here. You can pick these. You don't have to pick these. A good way to approach this is to like select 10 of these, then whittle it down to 5, and down to really, really helpful for you to understand that these are my 3 core values of who I am as a person, or my 5 core values of who I am as a person, or my personality traits. Because guess what? When an admissions officer is reading your essay, they're basically looking for these, right? They're looking to understand like who you are. If they were to describe who you were, what words would they use to describe you, right? Would they say that you're, democracy and helping others and like your personal growth, or that you're, really into, nutrition, or all sorts of things like that, or your community, or that you're like really brave. There's so many different kind of options here, and this is just like a very tiny list of what it could be. But you want your reader to be able to quickly describe who you are, because that helps them understand, okay, do I see this student fitting on this campus? And a lot of the stories that you're telling are the little examples. your traits or your values to your reader. So I'm going to pause here. What I'd like for you to do is pick some of these out. You can start with 10, and we'll try to 3 of these. You might use some more of these, the other ones that you've picked kind of in other essays to like prove out your other values and other essays that you have to write. But this is really, really, really important. Prompts.com, you can actually go through like this exercise like within our software tools, or you can go to the College Essay Guy website and you can download the values exercise if you want to do that. Normally it's a 5 to 10 minute thing, but we're only going to do it in a couple minutes here.
So, Brad, I'm just going to tell you one other question that came up, which I think is a good one. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you. I was just going to make a comment. Have there been any bad questions? So.
That's true. Fair enough. But somebody is asking, how do you talk about something like what you can bring to the table without sounding bragging or obnoxious?
Well, it's by saying that, out and saying that I'm amazing, but showing them that through the stories that you are basically telling them, just like literally like, here's my life experience. This is what I write about myself as a result. Like that's not going to come across as bragging because those are just facts. But if you're just like putting facts down that, basically just facts of your experiences down on the table, that's something that it never comes across as bragging, or it would be difficult and to come across as bragging. And you can always like ask them like, hey, does this sound like this is bragging or not? Or am I being too humble? Or that sort of thing. You try to strike the right balance. But as I said, like as long as you are actually like just telling your life experiences, you will be generally really good shape on that, because you're just showing them kind of this is who I am versus saying who you are. Okay. So those 4 things that we just covered are typically the types of things, like the stuff the question here is, and I'm going to actually come back so I can see the show of hands here, but who here, students, who here actually like who's written a draft of their essays feels these things actually come across in your essays? You? Okay, that's good. It's a good start. Who here kind of is like, oh, I'm not sure if these things come across in my essay currently. All right. Things that you might want to do is like make these notes, and we're going to talk about like how to structure essay in just a minute. But whenever you have somebody that's reading an essay, and we're going to also talk about like how do you get feedback on an essay in a bit. But whenever you're reading your having somebody read your essay, after they're done with their essay, ask them what they learned about you. Guess what? And then like see, does that match with what I just wrote down? And you might be surprised as well. All right, next item. We're going to talk about structure essay. Yay. But actually, I guess first of all, are there any things that, we talked a lot about kinds of we want to just talk about like content related to what we just wrote about. Does have anything else come up?
Nope, not right now.
Okay, more stuff later, but let's actually talk about outlining and actually kind of create an outline. So there's basically two common types of outlines for essays. One is the structure that we call like the journey or the narrative essay. So you can sort of the college essay guy calls it the narrative essay. This type of essay works really well for an essay that's focused on the time of personal growth. We'll talk about why in a second. The second structure is called a montage type essay. And this works really well for an essay that's more focused on a passion. And so let's talk about these two types of essays, and then you guys can work a little bit on an outline for your essay. So first, the journey structure. So introduction is where you just set up your story. So maybe there's a problem that needs to be solved, and you're gonna like drop some hints as to what might introduction. We talk about a couple strategies there that we can use. We'll probably talk about those strategies as we go through some example essays that people submitted. The second is then talk about who you were for the time of your personal growth. This next section is like what we call during, which is like what actually happened during your time of personal growth. And finally is what happened after your time of personal growth, which basically is what did you learn about this from your time of personal growth, and then like what are the specific actions or what have you basically done since your time of personal growth that's kind of as a result of what you learned about yourself, and then how does this relate to your future ambitions. Now, in terms of like how do you break this, the introduction and the before part of the essay should be about a third of your essay. The during part of your essay should be about a third of your essay, and the after part of your essay should be about a third of your essay. What we usually say is the during part of their essay is literally like 90 to 100% of the essay. Okay, that's a problem because it doesn't talk about a lot of the other critical steps for your that you've gone through. And we'll talk a little, as I said, like as we go through a couple of the example or the essays that people submitted and just talk about some feedback on them. We'll get into kind of some more weeds here and actually like introduction, which is like one of the most critical parts of the essay. The second type of essay that works really well for a passions type of essays or a passion that you might have, or called a montage type essay, which is basically you have a theme for your essay and you've had a lot of experiences in your life related to that theme. So perhaps you want to become a nurse, right? And that was initially because of an experience that maybe one of your grandparents had as they were, had cancer or something like that, right? And so like that's a piece of what to be a nurse. And then you might have like shadowed, somebody in a hospital or volunteered in a hospital. And like that might also be an experience that has led you to want to be a nurse. And then you have to kind of led you to want to be a nurse, right? And basically you can just systematically, set up the theme of your essay as, let me tell you a little bit about a story of like why I want to like help others healthcare and be a nurse. And then you have a paragraph about each of these experiences that kind of relate to this theme, talk about what you learned about yourself as a result of each of those experiences, and then how it relates to who you are. Each of these experiences kind of ties to one of your values that you've written down. And then at the end of your essay, you kind of make this theme clear by providing a tie to your ambitions, right? So that's kind of what we call the montage essay, where it's like a bunch of kind of different snapshots and of experiences in your life that kind of all relate under a single theme of your essay. Got it? So what we're going to do now is I want you to all to each narrative structure up here first. This is kind of the sort of exercises that you can do to also help you develop the outline. You can do those for free actually at I'll put up the URL later, prompt.com/road to college. And you go for our full outline creating tool there. But this can just start helping you think about, just put some bullet points down about what you might want to write about in each of these parts of your essay. And if you are still good guys, because you say that you actually need to improve. And if there's any questions that come in, just drop them into the chat and we'll work on those as well. And parents, you should be doing this too.
Brad, there was a question of how long is an average essay?
Depends on which application you're writing. So the Common App essay, maximum word count is 650 words. Vast majority of essays we get are between 640 and 650 words that people submit. So usually you want to use pretty much your full word count if you can. If you're writing the Coalition App essay, usually it's 500 to 550 words is the recommended length. So it's a little bit shorter. If you're doing the University of California Precise Questions, it's 300 words per essay, which is fairly short. Maximum word count, you should just pretty much use the maximum word count. That's what we recommend. However, when you're writing your first draft, do not care about word count at all. Most first drafts I see, I can usually take all of the content in that first draft and basically have it be like only 30 to 40% of what actually ends up in their essay. So usually start long. Don't worry about word count. If you're 700 words,
Brad, another question of journey and a passion structure.
Yep, exactly. Tie the two together pretty easily. It works to be really effective. Those are the types of things that you got to do it. See if it works. Just make sure. And in particular, with the number one thing that I see people leave out of their essays is the after part of the essay, or they might only touch on it in a second. About a real critical thing is like, what have you done since this time of personal growth, based off of what you've learned about yourself to prove that yes, you changed, but you're not just telling me you changed. You've proved to me that you've changed. That's the really important part. And I would say, at least 3/4 of like the first drafts I see or more, basically like just leave that part out. And that, as I said, like that's probably the most critical thing you can do in your essay. Anything else, or I'm going to move on to the next part? So now we got started a bit late.
Yeah, okay, here quickly.
Go ahead.
Should I separate the essays in paragraph based on before, during, and after?
That's, the super easy way is you have an intro paragraph, you have a before paragraph, a during paragraph, an after paragraph, and then like a little at the end, after paragraph in it. That's fine. You can get a lot more creative than that. You can have as many paragraphs as you want. I see people put poems there. Like dialogue. You can do so many different things. The key is like just your reader needs to understand what is happening in the essay at every point of the essay. A little bit about it, we're going into some of the examples and how to provide feedback on essays. But try to stay away from like the 5-paragraph essay if you can. It's totally fine if you do write a 5-paragraph essay. The number one thing that I tell people is if you see all these example essays online that are being held up as shining, amazing, great college application essays, don't think you need to be like that, because people are just putting them out there because they thought they were really creative and the student got into the school. But guess what? Like, not every not all the essays are getting into Harvard are like that. A very small percentage of them actually are like that. And so all you really need to do is, one, just like keep reader attention, which we'll talk about doing. And we actually go through some examples. Number 2 is just tell your story and make it really clear. Like, the purpose of this is for it to be really clear to your reader who you are as a person, right? And do you fit really well on their campus, right? Can they envision you there, and will, based off of what they learned about you, believe that you will be successful both in college and after college, right? They're basically placing a bet on you. They're placing a bet that you will graduate and go on to do helpful things in the world in whatever shape or form that is. finance, it could be whatever. The key is like for the message that you're trying to get across to come across in the essay, it doesn't need to be beautiful words. It doesn't need to be beautiful language. Like I was talking to the dean of admissions at MIT like a month or so ago. Like, we do not care. Literally just do not care how beautiful the writing is. All they care about is you actually answer their questions on their application. That's all they care about. There's a reason why they're asking those questions. Unfortunately, many schools like have very difficult prompts to understand like what you're supposed to write about. That's why we're talking about this right now, because these are the types of things that you really need to write about. And we're going to cover a couple tips on common supplements right at the end of this session. All right. So let's talk about how to get really good feedback on your essay. Parents, listen up. These are the questions that whenever I review an essay, or anybody on my team reviews an essay, of the 15,000 essays we're reviewing this year, or whatever the number is, we ask ourselves these questions on all of, especially the first drafts of essays. There's effectively, and these are really critical, important questions that you should be providing to anybody that you have read your essay. You want them to answer these questions for you, because otherwise, when you think about these things, they're just going to say, oh, this is pretty good, or I kind of got it. You actually want them to be critically thinking as they're reading that. So here's the 4 kind of critical questions. So one, did I learn about color? So like in 1 to 2 sentences, or 3 or 4 sometimes, if they were to summarize basically what I learned, like who you are as a person, like what are your personality traits, what makes you like a compelling person, like summarize that in 1 to 2 sentences, sometimes 3 or 4 sentences. That's the number one thing you want somebody to do after reading your essay, because then you can compare it to what you think across in the essay as the author of the essay. Question number 2 is what you learned compelling? Right. So in other words, like, oh, that's really exciting. Like, I think this person's gonna, add a lot to my student body, basically. The next question is basically, how do you make it more compelling? Which we take what you learned that you wanted to learn. This is the most critical question, because what we call these are the unanswered questions. So commonly, unanswered questions are, for example, for a journey essay, a lot of times I might understand who you were actually before this experience. Right? And you can come up with a lot of kind of unanswered questions, and help kind of think through who were you before this experience. The other thing is, what have you done since this experience to prove to me that you learned something about yourself? We talked about this before. Once again, another really critical unanswered question. So it's basically, as you're reading the essay, whoever's reading it needs to think at any point in time, like, I really want to know X, Y, Z, but that didn't get answered. Those are what we call the unanswered questions, and those are really, really helpful for better content and more compelling content to include in the essay. And the 4th is the essay well structured. So a good way to think about this is, if I'm reading the beginning of the essay to the end of the essay, at every single point in the essay, I'm thinking I'm going to accept this student. Why is that important? Well, because the average admissions officer is reading 34 applications a day. Basically, every time that they start reading an essay, if they're 2 or 3 sentences into the essay and they're thinking, I have no idea why this is relevant to this, who this student is, they're going to start thinking reject. And once they start thinking reject, it's almost impossible to get them back to accept, because naturally your mind kind of starts shutting down. Now, you don't think that should happen, but if you think about any, like we always say, it's like write like a journalist, right? So if you think about like any news article or any article that you read, basically you read the first few sentences and then decide whether or not you're going to continue reading, right? So the most compelling part of your entire essay is like 2/3 of the way through the essay, and then all of a sudden the reader is like, oh, that's really interesting. Guess what? They've gone through 2/3 of the essay thinking that they were. It's really hard to get them back to accept. So once again, it's like literally as you're reading the essay, am I thinking I'm going to accept this student at each point in the essay? Do I have a good sense of where at this point in the essay? You don't have to give away every answer, but do I have a good sense of like what is likely to happen later in the essay as I'm reading it, even from the beginning of the essay? And then the question is like, how can this structure be improved? So like, how can I move around the essay? How can I restructure my essay? Almost like creating an example outline of how to restructure the essay in order to make it better. We find that about 95% of the first drafts of personal statements that we make, need a significant rewrite to the point where we're providing basically an example outline of how a student can restructure their essay. One, significantly read the word count and the content that's currently in there, and two, fit in a lot of the unanswered questions, and three, like how to begin like the introduction in a much more compelling way to kind of get them to, as I said, the reader to be in the beginning of the essay, all the way through the end of the essay, and that's very, very hard to do, right? Especially for first drafts. These are the type of essay that you probably haven't written before. So, as I said, like anybody that you have read your essay, your peers, your parents, some other family members, your teachers, have them answer these questions. These are really, really critical questions. Okay, so let's actually go through some essays now while we're looking at these questions. Thank you to everybody who submitted their essays, and we are going to look at a few. Any other questions that come in so far, Debbie, before we start?
Okay, yes. As a parent reading the essay, it's hard to find what we've learned about the author. Is this a good reason not to be the person giving feedback?
Yes, the short answer. So it's actually a lot of times really good to have somebody that doesn't know your student particularly well, because that's basically what your admissions reader is not going to know the student particularly well, right, or at all. They'll just have read through, usually they'll read through like the grades and like the, activities and other their personal process before they read the essay. So they'll have a limited knowledge of the student before they're reading the personal statement and the other essays. But yeah, a lot of times it's really, really helpful for a person that doesn't necessarily know the student to read the essay to kind of pull that out. Because a lot of times you would be surprised, and this goes for everything. Like I personally write, everything I write, like I get feedback on everything. And sometimes the messages that I think are coming across are actually not coming across, right? So you need a lot of times, like some sort of third party that doesn't know what you're doing particularly well, who you are particularly well, to provide feedback on the essays. It can be really, really, really helpful. Okay, so we're not going to read all 4 of these essays. I'm going to just pick out some different things. We read them. Highlight here. And so let's start with this essay. So number 1, and I'm sorry if I'm going to come across as a little bit harsh, things with love and trying to help everybody. And I hope that everybody can kind of learn from this experience. So number 1 is title the essay. You don't title your essay at all, or that which is totally fine. Or if you're going to title your essay, you want to pick something that's not necessarily cliche or something that a lot of people might think this is cliche, is like beat of my drum, right? So a lot of people would, include in their essay, or far too many people is I move to the beat of my own drum, right? It's a typical saying. Never say, a Gandhi quote in your essay, right? Just everybody does it. Right. So just be very careful as to what your title is and how that might be perceived by them before they, because initially when I read this, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to really like this particular essay. All right. Now, let me just talk about introduction really quick, because this is always the most critical part of the essay. So we're going to talk probably a little bit about each. Okay. So this one starts with a quote. So it's basically in a scene. So I am sorry, Dario, but we do not have the resources available nor the ability to support your extended essay in film. You're going to have to find another to write about. This is a pretty good opening. Okay, we'll see some other openings that are a little less exciting as we go. But what's nice about this is immediately I have a pretty good sense of what this essay is going to be about, right? Who here thinks that they're actually going to write about a different topic for their essay, for this extended essay? The answer is literally probably nobody. How you're writing about this essay is you are going to write an essay in extended film, but you are not being supported for it because you have no resources. This is interesting, right? Because immediately, this is an essay. It's about intellectual curiosity and self-learning. Awesome. Okay, so that's a pretty good start to the essay. There's some improvements that could be made here. I probably have a lot of information that I don't necessarily need per se, but I do like learning that it's in Southeast Asia, smaller school, doesn't necessarily have to say international school, and that sort of thing. But I just kind of want to highlight, kind of a critical thing here is so I was expecting in this particular essay, like a little bit more kind of about the whole, learning process or the specifics of what you did to kind of really learn about film during this essay, which I get some of, but I feel like you could be a bit more specific as you go to really show how you really like investigated this topic in a lot of depth and all sorts of stuff like that. And then the other critical thing that I'll just cover at the end, where you're talking about I love videos and you can always say they are mine. That's interesting, right? So like you've done something with videos and that sort of stuff, but I would really like to see a little bit more about kind of some of the stuff that you've done since you've begun your exploration in film and all the other really fun, amazing things that you've gone on to do, right? And so like I start getting a little bit of that, but I would like some kind of more, kind of specifics kind of related to that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next essay as well, but I do really like this topic for an essay, and I do like kind of the beginning of the essay. There's a lot of little improvements that can be made, as we go through, but it's a really good first start, which is awesome. Okay. Oh, I'm going to move to this gears essay next. So let me just make it a little bit bigger. So let's talk about this, right? So this is an introduction and a topic of the essay that I'm not particularly excited about. So I'm just going to read the first paragraph. I'm not going to focus on the rest of the essay. I'm just going to focus on the introduction here. And like what is kind of like my thought process as I'm going through the introduction. So I'm just going to read it out loud and then talk a little bit about it. So the car lurched forward and I stomped on the brake pedal. I only had my learner's permit for 2 months and I still did not know how to drive. It's well below the speed limit to make sure that I didn't stall the car on the way to the industrial park. My dad told me that he would teach me how the gears in the engine worked by driving around the inside of the industrial park. I thought it was a waste of time. When we arrived, the car instantly stalled. I sat back into my seat and mentally prepared myself. I turned the keys and heard the car rumble back to life. I slowly drove through the Ringwood Industrial Park, following my dad's directions. Still. All right, so what am I thinking as a reader? Amazingly, I've actually read a good number of essays on driving stick. This is a topic that people like to write about. So the first thing that I think about is like, okay, how does this particular experience with learning to drive stick actually, like, how's this relevant to who this student is as a person? Now, that to me is kind of like the critical here. I go on, like a lot of the rest of the essay is about kind of this experience with this hill and how it was difficult and kind of overcoming that, particular experience. But I never really got like a true sense of like who the student was as a person. Are they, as I said, some of the most critical things are, driven, motivated, kind of like some sort of intellectual curiosity, or like what is the student's values just in general. And so my initial thought as I'm reading this essay is, okay, yes, it's starting in a scene. That's generally nice. But the key is like, how is this particularly relevant? I do have an interesting ending. 5 minutes later, we reach the hill. So I'm dropping a hint that this hill might be a really complex or difficult experience. But it's not clear to me, like, what am I actually learn about this student after reading this essay. It's very different than the one that we just looked at, where I'm pretty sure within the first 2 lines of the essay that I'm going to learn about experience with film and kind of this deep introspective self-study of film, because they don't have any resources and having to kind of put all that together to create this paper, right? So I have a that's pretty compelling to me. This is in the first couple of sentences of the essay, and here I'm less sure of how this particular topic is relevant. Maybe there's some really good stuff that will come, but I'm not sure if it's going to come. As I said, I would recommend probably not writing about this particular topic because I didn't feel that it really came through, and that most of it was like a critical moment in your life. I would typically recommend like figuring out a way that this particular story related to shifting was actually maybe like 3 to 4 sentences and was like an inciting incident for a broader journey and discussion of some things that you had gone on to do. That is like a much longer time of personal growth rather than just like this little moment in time. This little moment may be an inciting incident to a broader time of personal growth. All right. Questions about these two, and we're going to go to the other two real quick. Debbie, did anything come up?
No questions.
Nope. Sorry we're going a bit long because it took like 30 minutes to get everything kind of set up. Okay. So let's talk about this particular. I'll zoom in and read it. So this is a little bit interesting, right? So very early on in the essay, I really like this beginning. Short. So in general, I like sentence essays that begin with to the point, generally 5 to 7 words or so. And this works pretty well. And I learned that I am a songwriter. Interesting, right? I learned that this person is a writer. I'm probably going to learn in the rest of the essay. They're dropping some hints that they're writing music, and that usually involves some learning, all that sort of fun stuff, which is exciting. Okay. I then get a number of scenes kind of along the way of, writing this, songwriter, and that's pretty cool. Got it. Now, like, where could, this particular thing be improved? What I like to see is ties between this songwriting experience and who you are and other aspects of your life, right? So a lot of this started becoming, the stuff with like a co-writer, other interesting things that, kind of you worked on together, which is somewhat interesting. But what this essay kind of signals to me is that, okay, I recorded a demo and shared it amongst publishers, a licensing agreement, and it was released on the artist's upcoming project. That seems kind of like thrown in at the end versus, oh, that's really like a big thing, right? And it feels like more content could be sent on that. There's a lot in here, just in general, like any time I see a paragraph this long, I generally don't want to read it. So try to keep your paragraphs at, somewhere around like 5 to 9 lines or so, or maybe even shorter. But there's a lot of content in here that could probably be cut or reduced to be able to expand more on like what happened later. And then are there ways that songwriting actually affected other parts of your life and may be related to what maybe your future ambitions are, because I didn't really get a great sense of that, right? So as I said, like in a lot of cases, like the topic, could be really good. It might have a really strong introduction already, but there's a lot of work that can be done in the middle that can kind of condense content that's already in the middle to be able to answer kind of these other unanswered questions that end up here. Because a lot of the essays I see, as I say, it becomes like, oh, this is really interesting. I only learned a very small amount about it in the essay. All right, and we have one final one that we'll real quick. All right, we're going to talk about the introduction again, just because so many people, the introduction is so critical to the essay. Okay, for the first time in my life, I was speechless because my heart was in my throat. I was held captive by a bright light in my face. I held my surrounded by 30 U.S. soldiers. They stared intently at me with the object in my hand. In front of them, there were bows aimed at my wrist, ready to strike. I was scared. There, bright lights sounded overhead. Here with us this evening is a very talented 15-year-old cellist from Long Island who won the opportunity to come here, to be here this evening and play alongside the New York Pops, joining us on A Victory at Sea and making his Carnegie Hall debut. All right. So what is interesting here? Obviously, playing Carnegie Hall, pretty awesome, right? Part of the problem, though, is that I'm actually fairly confused by the beginning of this essay. It's like, why were they? Okay, that's fine. You're trying to create some sort of suspense, but it takes a little while to get to the point where, okay, now I get it, right? They're in Carnegie Hall, cellist, right? That's really kind of fascinating or interesting. You could probably get a lot of the same effect with, maybe one line or two sentences here. You're trying to get at without me thinking, like, where is this student going with it, right? Even something this short, still, if it's more than like 3 or 4 sentences where you're going with the essay, that's not great. Like, I need some like hints very much earlier on that, okay, cellist, New York Pops, that's really compelling. Like, now when I hear that, I'm like, I want to learn more about how that student got there, right? But a lot of this, you can kind of look at it as almost like throwaway, or a lot of, don't necessarily add a lot of value into how I'm reading the essay, but are kind of there as like some storytelling elements, which is interesting, but they're not worth that value to my understanding. But also, by the way, just random aside, don't put 2 spaces after a period. Don't do that. That's actually from back in the day where kids would put after a period because typewriters, a space was always the same distance on a typewriter, whereas when you have a computer word processor, it's naturally put space after a period. Okay, just an FYI. A little thing that frustrates me is 2 spaces after periods. Sorry. All right. Not that against you on. Just bugs me. Like the other thing that I just want to call out here is, there's a lot of stuff within this essay that I just did not, kind of left me wondering, okay, why are some of these things included? I'm not really sure of like how this stuff kind of gets with the broader picture of like who this person is as the student. Right? I get a lot from very early childhood, which can maybe be a lot smaller snippets overall, that sort of thing. Like, part of it is like, okay, what is the story that you're really trying to tell here? If I'm telling the story, is this really a story that's about me becoming this person that's a cellist, me finding acceptance? Like, what is the main things that are kind of trying to come across in this essay? That's less clear to me of like the main messages that you're trying to come across of like who you are as like a person, kind of related to that. So there's a lot here, and like how do you tie that in, right, to becoming a cellist? There's some things that you might be able to tie in there, related to, sometimes, you have to make stretch, things. But I would imagine that there's a lot of stuff related to like precision and other things like that, that is kind of related to playing cello and all sorts of stuff like that, and kind of learning the process of perfecting a craft, which is kind of maybe relatively similar to the physician, and maybe there's something that you can tie in there that even experiences that are more related to physicians. So that's it for that stuff. Really, really fast on supplements, but do we have any questions kind of related to? I just wanted to like go through a few of the essays that people had sent through.
No more questions right this minute. This is actually a question from a while ago, and it was just a question on do you have to have a title?
No. A lot of people do, but I do. I wouldn't. I would say titles can help sometimes because they kind of put you in a certain mindset, but a lot of times they can hurt as well. So because it immediately might leave my mind thinking like, oh, really? Like another essay like this, even though the essay may not be like that. So you have to be kind of careful with your titles. So don't just throw a title in because you're like, oh, I need a title, right? Just make sure that it's like, yes, this is something that I feel like really adds a lot of value for somebody to actually read. Because it does count in the word count. Okay. Last thing, I'm just going to touch on the why essay really quick because most people don't write this correctly. So the why essay, there's like a number of critical things that you can include in your essay. The number one thing that you need to do when you're writing a why essay is to do your research. A lot of why essays I see are like, I want to go to NYU because it's a top-rated school and it's in New York City and I want to live in New York City. I'm paraphrasing. It's usually longer than that, but that's the gist of it. And that's not good, right? So usually you don't necessarily talk in other things like that in the essay. You want to do your research into the school, and your goal is to demonstrate interest in the school and make it clear that you are a good fit for the school, right? And so the best way to do that is to be really, really, really specific in your essays and to understand how the particular school that you're writing this essay for actually differentiates, like what differentiates it from some of the other schools you're applying to, right? So things that you want to talk about are your academic interests. So think about what are your academic interests and then compare it to what makes the school's academics unique. So maybe there's like a very specific class, like maybe you're interested in artificial intelligence and the school that you're applying to has and professors that understand artificial intelligence and you want to learn from them. Name the professors, name the classes, right? It clearly state that you have interest in this area and why, and demonstrate that interest in artificial intelligence, and then tie that to, hey, I've done my research on the school and like it fits with what I'm interested in. Okay. The second thing is your non-academic interests versus what the school offers. If you are new crew, for example, and you want to row crew in college, don't write about that in your essay when the school does not offer crew, right? Those types of things. So think about like what are your non-academic and like how does that relate to what the school offers? Maybe you're actually interested in doing some sort of research like while you're in school. Like maybe the school is really known for their research opportunities, right? To work with professors, like you can write about that here. Values, so the values exercise that we just did versus the school's mission and values. So if your values are really, really critical to who you are as a person, maybe environmentalism or other things like that, and you're applying to this school because guess what? Like the school's treatment is to what you value, right? That can be something that's really nice to include in this essay. And then like another one is like, how do you like to learn versus like what is unique about how the school teaches, right? Don't just say like, I want to go to a small school. That's not particularly interesting. Like actually understand how does this school teach? Like, so for example, Harvard, at least their business school, is known for teaching via case study, doing interesting stuff that way. Maybe if you are much better, like learning through discussions, and the school has a very unique method for how to approach doing that, or different curriculum, or other things like that, and that ties to like learning about that can be really nice in this type of essay. And then the final is like, how do you like to engage with other people versus what the school's culture is? And so if you've gone to campus and you have a sense of what the school culture is, you can, a lot of times kind of like writing about like how you are as a person and how that fits with the school can be, and what you've learned about the school can be really, really nice from like a cultural perspective. I haven't visited the school, research online. A lot of times what might be helpful is just to talk to a person that has gone to that school. One way to do that is there's a company called Campus Sherpa, campussherpa.com, and you pay not a lot of money and like actually have a like 30-minute or an hour conversation with a student from that school. And you can ask them all sorts of questions and other things like that and get a really good sense of what it is and what makes that school compelling, and those are the types of things that you can include in your YS essays. Finally, the activity description essay is another super common one. The best approach to this is kind of treat it like a very short version of like your essay or on personal growth or your passions essay. Think about like what has really set you apart from your peers. Like, so what differentiates you? What do you spend a lot more time on? Maybe you're a leader. You get, you're getting a lot of things done. You have ability, or you have a unique set of abilities that you've developed for this particular activity. Then when you're writing this essay, the basic structure is, what is the activity that you specifically did for that activity? In other words, kind of think about like, if I wasn't there, what wouldn't have happened, right? Quantify it if possible. So if you increase membership like 20%, right? Quantify it. That's kind of interesting and compelling. Quantify it if possible, and talk about the steps that you actually took to overcome a challenge or solve a problem with this activity, or other things like that, and then talk about what you learned from the experience. So pretty simple formula, but a lot of people, kind of miss on like the impact elements of it. Specifically that did with the activity, they might just write about marching band and how much they love music, right? That's not as interesting. That's not really what they're looking for here. All right. You can go to prompt.com/road to college, and you can get free access to our really cool web application that helps you organize all the essays that you need to write. So we find that the average student that uses our system is schools. We actually have every single essay prompt for every school in the system. So you basically just input the list of schools you're applying to, and then we say, here's all the essays you need. For college or for an engineering program you might be applying to, etc. Starting next week, by attending the session through Road to College, you'll actually be able to get discounts on our essay review. Yeah, that's really fun and exciting, depending on kind of like how many review credits you're buying and that sort of thing. It's somewhere between like $50 and $60 a review. Another really good resource that just has like a bunch of free supplies, montageessayguide.com. They have like guidance on all sorts of different types of essays, such as the University of California personal insight questions. A lot of the stuff we talked about today, you can use as tools as you're writing those particular essays. That's another really good resource that you can use, and like our system as well at Prompt kind of like guides you through the process of if you're writing your personal statement as well. Kind of you go to the content section within it. All right, any questions? I'll stay online. I can stay online for 5 or 10 minutes, but I know we've already gone over. Very sorry about that, but I just wanted to make sure that one, that the technology worked, obviously. So number two is we wanted to make sure that we got to everybody's questions as we went through stuff.
Brad, there's a question about, can you write about what you did that wasn't successful?
Yes, I mean you can, but once again you have to write about it in like a specific way where you learned something from that experience, and what you've learned you've maybe now taken and acted on, so that way you're kind of transforming it into, hey, I failed with this, but here's what I learned, and then I went and did this other thing and was successful because I had this experience of failure. Yeah, you don't have just failing and you're done with it. That's not that exciting.
Okay, here's another one.
Let me see everybody's face now. I'll stop sharing my screen here.
Okay, I'm working on my essay outline and wondering if it's too cliche. Is the journey essay overdone? Isn't, quote, X event changed me, so now I want to major in Y? Isn't that how every mediocre college essay is structured?
No, I mean, I would say something like 70-80%, maybe more, about of essays used. And the fact of the matter is that it leads to really, really compelling stories and content as long as you're like including the right types of stuff and you can be really creative with it. The journey essay is literally every single movie you've pretty much ever watched. It's what's called the hero's journey. And if you think about anything you've probably ever watched, they have some sort of beginning where basically you have this character that, let's say it's Luke from Luke Skywalker from Star Wars, who's never going to do anything. He's literally farming moisture, right? This is very unexciting. Then there's like basically like an inciting incident where he finds some droids, right? He learns that he has an ability with the Force from a mentor, right? He goes through this journey, which is called the hero's journey, right? At the end, you know, he blows up the Death Star. He learns some stuff about himself and on a journey to become a Jedi. Like it's a formula that works, right? It's, you know, if you look at the, you know, Homer's Odyssey, like, I mean, just like pretty much most of the movies that you've probably ever seen, you know, almost every story kind of like follows this general framework because it works really, really, really well. And there's kind of an infinite number of combinations for things that you can, that, you know, approaches and stuff that you can write. Like the critical part of a college essay is, you could say, oh, I don't want it to be boring, but what you want is you just want your reader to know who the heck you are, right? That's the critical part of the essay. Like just like I can read the essay, understand who this person is, and I believe that they're a good fit for my school, right? As I was saying before, most of the essays you read online, they're held up as these shining examples of things that, like, oh my God, I can't believe somebody wrote like this. And then I read an essay that's like, somebody's like, oh, I have to use a metaphor. Oh, I'm going to say that I'm going to use a black hole as a metaphor. Yes, guess what? This medical engineer, like, they don't want to do anything with astrophysics or anything with black holes. Like, why a black hole a metaphor? Because it just sucks up knowledge. Like, it's not, doesn't really make that much sense, right? So, as I said, like, it's not even really about playing it safe. It's literally just about, like, here's the information that I want somebody to know about me. Like, what is the most efficient way of getting that across? It doesn't have to be beautiful. It just has to be clean, and for them to have a pretty good understanding that I've went through these experiences and that's led me to become this type of person, and let me prove it to you that I really am this type of person, and guess what? That's led to me to want to do this. So kind of look at it as like, what do I really want the person to know about me? And then if I can get really creative within that, that's fine. But if I'm getting creative and that message is not clear, then I have still failed. So that's the way I look at it. And, you know, so many people get into amazing schools with essays that you might be like, this is hard. But guess what? It was really clear as to who that person is. And that's great, right? I mean, we had people last year that were getting into Harvard with writing like 5-paragraph essays, you know, like very super, right? You know, it was like, here's who I am. That's who I am, right? And I think that that's totally fine.
Okay, here's a question. My daughter's world is dance, so it fits into the same boat as athletics, specifically flamenco from Spain. Can she write about how it ties to her roots, her culture? She wants to be a physical therapist for dancers while still dancing, or is that still not enough?
So once again, it kind of comes to the setting of the essay can be dance, but the essay is really about, right? The essay is really about like, okay, I have a very strong passion for dance. I've also, because of this experience, you know, have either personally gone through a lot of issues or had a lot of friends that have experienced those types of things and like worked through some stuff emotionally with them or whatever it is. And like all of this stuff has kind of led me, you know, because, you know, I'm really into kind of all the physical activity and dance and everything to want to. Really, the essay is about all these other experiences that you've gone through that's kind of led you on this journey, and the setting just happens to be dance, right? That can work really, really well. It's, you know, you want to make sure you're kind of tying in some, you know, other experiences as well, that it's not necessarily like, oh, I'm just reading an essay about dance. And a lot of times you want to be super clear in your essay that this essay is not, like, sometimes, like, I will suggest that a student literally writes, this essay is not about dance. It's actually about this. And let me, otherwise the reader will be like, oh, I'm reading another essay about dance. And then they read all of a sudden, no, this essay is actually not about dance. It's actually about this other thing. And it kind of throws them for a loop, and then they're intrigued, right? So it's like a little trick you can play. You don't want somebody to get to the end of the first paragraph and for it to think, oh, here's another essay about how this person likes dancing, right? That you don't want to have happen.
Okay, a quick question is, if the supplement essays don't give a word count, how long should they be?
Most supplement essays give, I don't give a word count. I would ask yourself, how many other essays am I writing for this school? If I'm writing like 4 or 5 essays for a school, and one of them, like, or all of them don't have word counts, you probably want to keep them pretty short, you know, 250, 350 words. If it's like a single essay that doesn't have a word count associated with it, you can get quite a bit longer. I like essays that are typically between 500 and 650 words. You can go a bit beyond that. Once you start getting to like 700, 800 plus word territory, things are really starting to drag, and I want to stop reading at that point. So kind of think of that as like a good rule, you know, rule of thumb. I really like 650 words. I think sometimes it's really hard to get everything out within 500, 550 words, but I would just kind of think anything else. It's getting kind of late, and I know some people, I still see sunlight in the background where you're at. That's pretty cool.
I noticed that too. We don't have any more questions. I thank you so much, Brad. I thank everybody. I'm so sorry for the technical problems at the beginning. This was I had used this platform before, but not that much. So sorry that we ran into some issues, but I still feel, I hope that the rest of the time was valuable when we were able to iron that out and kind of get started for real. So thanks, Brad. I'll send a follow-up email with more information and some of the links that Brad mentioned. Somebody's asking, Brad, can we get the slides to what you presented tonight?
Yeah, I'll send those over to you, Debbie, and you can send those out. That's definitely fine. These are kind of like the dumbed down versions of stuff that we have in the system, in our system too. So you might want to just check that out as well. And as I said, like, highly recommend, you don't have to use us, but, you know, highly recommend using somebody, whether or not it's your teacher or your parents or back on your essays. I typically find the typical experience is write a first draft of your essay. Don't even worry about it. Just don't say, I'm going to even touch that again, and feedback on it. And then iterate on it, because you're probably going to have to make significant modifications. Don't think the first version of what you need to submit is amazing. And usually we find that it takes about 3 drafts until a student gets there. A week, ideally now, write a draft, get feedback on it. Next day, fix it. Write your next draft, fix it, done. Right? That's the strategy. And then you can feel really good. Okay, I'm done with this essay. Let me move on to the next one.
Yeah, I'll just
right.
give, and I think what you said, Brad, is perfect. And I am not a writing expert, but I will just say that whenever I write anything, you know, it could be for business or personal, when I write it and then I step away from it for an hour, for 2 hours, even if you have a chance to step away from it for a day or two, and then you come back and read it, it either works or it doesn't work, or you find a lot of errors that you didn't see the first time. So the fact that you guys are all starting now and that you have time, you know, use that time to kind of, like, you know, take a break, come back, read it. It will really make a big difference in improving whatever you're trying to get across.
The one thing I'll say is don't write a draft and then let it sit for a week and then come back to it. Your mind won't be fresh enough with the content. Usually I would say only wait like a maximum of like a day or two before you kind of like start touching it again and looking at it again. Okay. All right. Thank you all very much. Have a good
Thank
one.
you, Brad.
And
Thanks, everyone.
about time for me to go to sleep. I got to be up at 4 a.m. tonight, so lots of fun. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.